Let's now see how God dealt with Pharaoh, and in this process we will learn more about the character of God. Now, many people have this idea, especially after reading Romans chapter 9, that God hath mercy on whom he hath mercy, and whom he hardens, and Pharaoh was in this passage of scripture. It would appear that God just arbitrarily just picks somebody and hardens his heart. Now, when we look at how God dealt with Pharaoh, we must understand that first, Pharaoh chose to have a hardened heart. The way he dealt with the Egyptian slaves for years before God dealt with him, he was hardened. He was sending their babies, male babies, to be killed. He was treating them very, very roughly. And even when God used Moses to put judgment on Pharaoh, we will notice that Pharaoh first hardened his heart. And then the Bible keeps saying, and he hardened his heart. In fact, something like 7 times, it's Pharaoh first that hardens his heart. And then we see God responding, in a sense, that you want to harden your heart? That's the way you want to go? Well, that's the way you will go. I'll help you to go in that direction. So while there are many people who like to emphasize the sovereignty of God in the election, he can choose who he wants, he can harden who he wants, it almost appears that that's the only character of God, is sovereignty. That's not true. God's also merciful, God's also just. And so when we see the judgment on Pharaoh, we see the full character of God. He had waited a long time before he sent Moses to Pharaoh. And then even when he sent Moses to deal with Pharaoh, he allowed Pharaoh to respond first. And finally it reaches a certain point when God, in his wisdom, in his mercy, and his sovereignty, realizes that this man is determined to continue this way, then I will help him in his direction. So we see that God is sovereign, but he is fair. So what we see here is how God dealt with Pharaoh. Now, how did God send the plagues? How did God deal with the Egyptians? Again, when God sent the plagues, he did not just come full blast. He sent them step by step. He started first with plagues that caused disturbances. The water turned to blood. Then frogs came into their house. Then the land, the dust of the land became lice. So that's very disturbing, but that's not really dangerous. But as they continued, Pharaoh continued to harden his heart, then God stepped up the plagues. He sent disease on the animals, plague on the animals. And then when they continue in hardness, then he sends danger to their life. He sends hailstones that could kill them, but didn't, as long as they took shelter. And finally, after having stepped up slowly from disturbance to disease to life-threatening danger, finally he brings death to the firstborn of Egypt. So you see how God, in his mercy, in his patience, stepped up the judgments, giving them time, giving Pharaoh and his leaders time to respond. Similarly, we see the plagues did not hit the humans straight away. It hit nature first. Frogs died a lot. Lice came up and lice died. Right? And then he hit the animals. And then finally, he hits people. So I hope you see here, while some people like to see one character of God. Oh, God chooses whom He will. God hardens whom He will. It's like, God just closes his eye, point at somebody, I'll harden that guy. God doesn't work that way, right? When we understand the whole Bible, we see a story like this, we begin to understand, not just read Romans chapter 9 and say, election, there's a new doctrine I learned today. Are you elected or not elected? Let's just look at the whole Bible, the context of the Bible. How did God elect to judge the nation of Egypt or Pharaoh? So when we see this, we begin to have a better understanding of our God, the character, the wonderful character of our God.